Greetings, Mavericks and new viewers. Tonight, direct and live from the Maverick News Network World Studios. This is Maverick News with Rick Walker.
Welcome back, everyone. Hello, Maverick family and new viewers from around the world. Great to have everybody here. Special broadcast tonight. We have a special guest in the house, Jeff Evely, Canadian veteran, freedom fighter, and a man with a unique insight into, I would say, today's threats to democracy and freedom. He'll be joining us in just a moment to give us insight and maybe some wisdom as we try to navigate what I think is already a third world war. Stay with me. Jeff joins us on the other side.
Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals, defenders of individual rights and freedoms, credible, trusted, grounded in reality. Maverick News. Defending free speech. Donate at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Maverick News. The world is watching.
Let's bring Jeff Evely in right now. There he is. Hello. Welcome back, sir.
Thanks for having me again, Rick. It's good to see you.
It's great to see you too. We have a lot of ground to cover tonight. We're going to talk. Well, I'm very excited to get your perspective on today's threats to our country, our democracy, freedom. But we have to start this conversation by reviewing what's going on with your court cases related to the Freedom Convoy. Can you bring us up to date? And I guess, first of all, before you even tell us what's happened with your sentencing, explain to people what it was you were charged with and why.
Sure thing. I had two court dates this week, actually. So one in Ottawa and one in my hometown here, Sydney. But the one in Ottawa obviously was for the convoy. I was charged with mischief and obstructing after I was taken down at about 4:15 a.m. On my way to the monument to stand on guard for thee, to take my sentry duty shift. I was the guy running the schedule, so naturally I ended up with the shittiest shift. And I got taken down right on Rideau and Mackenzie, and right in the crosswalk there. And I signed an undertaking to get released, said I wouldn't return to the red zone, but then Neil called Rolling Thunder, and we were going back in April, and we had the wreath laying ceremony to give dignity back to the monument and the veterans who were, beat up and drug off it and stuff like that. And I was the sergeant major on parade, and I gave a speech, so I was a breach of my conditions. So there was a breach that was added for this sentencing hearing. Anyway, I pled guilty to that a while back because I knew what I was doing. I wasn't missing that ceremony. So, so I ended up with 12 months probation, a $300 fine, a 50 hours community service. And I can't protest in Ottawa while I'm on probation, so 12 months. So.
All that because you were walking to the war monument.
Yeah, we actually had a deal with the OPS there. We set it up through their liaison team. There's a video that we submitted as evidence to of retired Captain Brian Marr actually making the verbal agreement with OPS. And we were running a sentry duty like the whole time, 24/7. So they knew we were there. And, you know, I was on my way to my shift and I knew that the people were waiting for me because I was messaging with them. So they decided to be dicks about it and take me down.
Wow. I see a microphone in front of you, but it sounds like you're on your camera mic. You might want to check your settings to make sure that you have the right source selected, because it does sound a little bit hollow. With the microphone as close as it is, it seems like it should be a little. Yeah. In fact, I'll tell you what, I'm going to take a little break and let you just double check your mic settings, and then we'll come back and maybe the audio might be a little bit better. Hang on, stay with us, folks.
You know, someone very profoundly once said many years ago that if fascism ever comes to America, it'll come in the name of liberalism.
Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers. If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on Earth.
The entire world is watching.
Every dictator, every crazy dictator in the world is watching.
The world is watching. On TV, the entire world is watching. On social media.
But the entire world is watching, and yes, they are seeing what we have apparently bravely been willing to say that others are thinking.
Stand for freedom. Literally stand for freedom. Let's get this done. The entire world is watching.
We're at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind in his long climb from the swamp to the stars.
Maverick News. Maverick News. Maverick News.
Let me have more control of my own destiny.
The world is watching.
Okay, that is much better. Yes. And I see you have your PPC hat on. I'm sure you want to tell us why.
Oh, I'm the candidate for Sydney Victoria, Sydney Glace Bay. we got redistricted out here just earlier this year. So, I'm the candidate for Sydney Glace Bay, and we're just kind of I got all my signatures and everything in the bank, so it's ready to go as soon as they drop the writ. And working on canvassing right now, and just sort of awareness raising, a lot of Twitter, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah. What is it that motivates you to do that? What are the issues for you?
I would say that you're correct in your assessment that it is World War III, and historians will look back and say this started with COVID in 2020. Canada, as it turns out, is strategically valuable, obviously, especially given our proximity to the United States. And there's a good book out there by Scott McGregor. He's a retired Canadian Armed Forces intelligence operator, and he co-authors it with somebody else. But anyway, Scott McGregor has a book called The Mosaic Effect, where he discusses like exactly what China has been up to in terms of absolutely polluting us with their proxies, essentially. One of the key ones, like Michel Juno-Ketsoya pointed out, he was the retired CSIS officer that said that people should go to jail because it's definitely borderline treason what's going on. He said there's over 2,000 operatives. He means United Front Work Department. So United Front is a communist term. All the different professions, as long as they adhere to the ideology, they all work together across all these all fields. And so they're usually business types or even teachers or lawyers, lobbyists, and the what he describes is they'll move here and they'll be like perfect citizens for 5-10 years, and then they'll activate. So they find their way into our institutions and politics and stuff like this, business relationships. It's a lot of that is going on in PEI right now. They basically own PEI, Sunrise Group, and they have these massive like Buddhist temples out there now where they're bringing in Chinese Buddhists, which is not a thing. I mean, they trample Buddhists in Tibet, and the men of the family are expected to kind of carry on the family legacy. They don't become monks, so they're bringing in like thousands through these monasteries, and they have the lowest retention rate of any province. I think it's like 11 to 17%, in Ontario 85%, and Alberta 88% or something like that. Everybody else is near the 90s. But for some reason in PEI, there's only 11 to 17% retention rate for first-generation immigrants. And this is happening at a time when, the United States Border Patrol is tracking 7 times the number of suspected terrorists crossing from Canada as are crossing from Mexico, despite the fact that, that just the sheer numbers of people coming across the Mexican border vastly outweigh what you see coming through Canada. But we still, we still have 7 times the number of terrorists coming from our country. So what's going on there? Trump is obviously taking notice, and he has expressed admiration for the truckers in the past. Said it was a horrible thing that they did, and it was, authoritarian and whatnot. I don't remember the exact words he used, but yes. And now he's trolling, he's trolling Trudeau. Won't let him stay at Mar-a-Lago, and putting memes out there of him standing there looking at the murder horn with the Canadian flag for some reason. So I think they're taking, the administration seems to be taking a pretty particular interest in Canada, and a lot of people around those circles on Twitter and stuff like that. A lot of big conservatives are talking about invading Canada, and they're getting a lot of encouragement.
I've been taking note of that for a while, whether it's what's his name there, Lieutenant Steve Rogers or Jackson Hinkle or Tim Pool or Tucker Carlson, or now even Donald Trump joking about making Canada the 51st state. What is going on? They can't be coordinating their jokes, or unless they're just stealing the materials from each other. I don't know what to make of it.
I think that Trump probably sets the tone and people get on message. One of the comments that I made on Twitter is that America may have heard us, but Ottawa still has not. So I think that's the situation we're in right now, and I think we owe it to the truckers.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So I'm excited to talk more about all of this, because I was watching you on the Jason Levine show, and you brought a lot of this stuff up, and you were on there with a panel of some other people. But as I was listening to you, it was really resonating with me. Like you were on point, and I wanted to give you more time to really expand on what you were saying over there, because I think it's very important, very insightful, and as I say, I think it's like accurate. It's spot on in my view. Okay. So excellent. Maybe we can sort of take a step back, and where's a good entry point to begin this discussion? I guess we already sort of did with the concerns about Chinese infiltration.
Yeah. So let's go back to the part where we agree that it's World War III. There's a book you can get on Amazon, published in 1999, that's based on some leaked Chinese military documents. It's called Unrestricted Warfare, and it outlines the whole strategy for basically defeating the West and the U.S. in particular. They talk a lot about lessons they took from watching the U.S. In Iraq, and they used combinational attacks, like everything right down to sanctions. And so they developed this whole strategy, this whole battle strategy. There's just every greasy, underhanded, motherless, commie bastard trick in the book. But some of the key prongs would be like, the economic one, obviously. So economic warfare, cultural warfare, cyber warfare, psychological warfare, media warfare. They captured media. And it's basically an upgrade to Sun Tzu's Art of War. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without any fighting. Even in Sun Tzu's Art of War, they talk about strategies that we would describe today as elite capture, where you basically, you take control of the state, turn the state against the people turn against the state, pit all the different ethnicities and religions and various groups against one another. And, we'll just stop working together and we'll be too busy fighting. The state will basically implode on its own, and they can kind of swoop in and impose whatever solution they choose while we're vulnerable. The art of war is relevant today, not because of like the horse cavalry movements described therein, but more because of Chapter 3, which is attack by stratagem, which is a plan to deceive the enemy, and Chapter 13, the use of spies, because he's obsessed with the use of spies and how to deploy them. And I'm not going to remember, like, he has 4 categories of spies, like turn spies, and I don't know. Anyway, that's United Front. That's the idea. And these are basically public servants. It's an arm of the CCP, the government itself. They work for them. There's a chain of command. They fall under like the education minister or something like that. They're Chinese government operatives. And also, they have the ethnic triads, which are being directed by Chinese intelligence. Those are the guys that are flooding us with fentanyl. They're the gangsters and the money launderers. And, they've been fiddling around. Like, they're probably the primary reason why Vancouver's real estate has gone so berserk, because it's a money laundering scheme. And one of the strategies actually described in unrestricted warfare is called drug warfare. So they direct the ethnic triads, the gangsters, the big circle boys are the big ones. And basically, like, they have their gambling operations and stuff like that in Macau and China, but they when they get to be so big, when they get to be so rich, that they'll be approached by intelligence and told, okay, time for you to go to Canada and, dump all that cash into go launder that over there, so it doesn't impact, our economy. And they also are engaged in human smuggling. Now they're making weed deals or something like that. Like BC Bud, I guess, is in high demand down in the United States. So, and they are probably headquartered in Canada, like Markham, Ontario. There was a huge bust too with the underground casino. Like, they're serious gangsters, right? And it's all part of the strategy. And cultural warfare, psychological warfare. I would point to probably the best example of there was the Kamloops mass grave hoax. Like, first it was abandoned graves, then it was a mass grave, and of course, those of us who were paying attention knew from the start that it was nothing. And they half-masted the flags and shamed the nation for its original sin.
For how many months was that? That was better
like
part
6
of a
months.
year. 6 months, yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
to the Legion's credit, I'm not a Legion man myself. I don't know any self-respecting veteran who is, but they were the ones who said that you can't lower the flags on Remembrance Day if they're not at full staff, and they put them up first. So good on the Legion for that. Credit where it's due. I mean, it was basically a Maoist cultural revolution. That was something that Mao Zedong did back in the 1960s, where he whips up the youth into a frenzy. And they basically go on these witch hunts, and they're, instead of, I guess, burning witches, they're shaming heretics. Anybody who for wrong think, for Western think. And so like physics professors, for example, would probably get shamed and put a dunce cap on their heads, and property owners and business owners, that kind of thing. They would be subjected to the struggle sessions, which is what every cult does. This is what totalitarian regimes are essentially, is they're secular cults, and they just put the state in place of God. And so that's why, when you're dealing with the smooth brains, the woke types, they get triggered. When you speak the truth, you blaspheme their dogma, and you just get the blasphemy reaction, right? Like it's like a visceral response followed by a quick burst of rage, and that's what it is. It's heresy. They just cry heresy and go for the pitchforks. So it's Marxism. They're Marxist-Leninists, and not just Marxist-Leninists, they're Chinese. And the Chinese, they play Go, whereas we play chess. And Go is actually older than chess. And so we Westerners, we tend to think in terms of capturing a key piece on the board, the king, probably analogous to something like a capital city. World War II ended with, the race to Berlin, and it was a tie, stalemate. But they in China, they play Go, where it's all pieces are equal, and it's about capturing all of your opponent's pieces, dominating the entire board, and making it so he can't even move. You see the same basic strategy being run. Say Sri Lanka, for example, their ESG scores are through the roof. And that's all really, like, they've basically captured the UN, that they say in unrestricted warfare that co-opting like supranational organizations like the WHO, and they say in their own words, the biggest of them all is the UN. They use it, as an instrument of economic warfare for things like climate change and ESGs and climate hoax, I should say, pardon me. And Sri Lanka's they brought in a Chinese company to build an international port in Hanaboda in Sri Lanka, which is just like right off the coast of India, whom they are basically surrounding, and they have these skirmishes with them in the north all the time. But their military is not great. It's not like a great kind of standing army. They're used to pushing around monks and stuff like that, but they come up against the Gurkhas in the mountains, and it's no bueno. So that's good. But now they have this massive port in Sri Lanka, just off the coast. And what they did was they built it on a loan. And then when they couldn't pay the loan, they brought in a shell company to bail them out. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was crazy. Like their entire budget was going towards just paying interest. And they went right back to the Chinese. They didn't even go to like the IMF and look for some kind of a bailout and austerity measures. No, they went back to the Chinese again. So they're indebted to them as well. And now a lot of the neighboring nations are trying to bail them out. But we saw what happened there. Their ESG scores are through the roof, and their economy collapsed, right? Like the whole thing just fell. One day, boom, there's nothing left of the state or any order in the society. And that's the basic strategy, is state collapse. So there's the psychological warfare that I was just talking about with the shaming tactics and stuff like that. You see a lot of what we call cancel culture, but it's I mentioned that there were Marxist-Leninists. So in Marx, he developed this dialectical materialism, which was based on Hegel's dialectic. And Hegel had this idea of like thesis meets antithesis, and you get synthesis, right? So he and the idea was like, you just kind of take these opposing ideas and throw them at each other, and the weak parts will cancel out, and the strong parts will stay. It's basically just a really highfalutin way of saying a compromise, but he was describing a method of sort of ascertaining truth, whereas what Marx did is he weaponized it, and now it's just like they take a total oppositional idea, like it's a dialectical attack, and cancel, say, Western values, right? So if you want border security, you're xenophobic, right? They'll come at you, cancel with something like that. If if you believe that there are only two sexes, well then you're sexist. So it's just basically a name calling strategy. But the idea is to basically negate our sense of reality, and we can see like the gender question has got to be the most obvious example of how people have completely lost all sense of reality. And it's just like Yuri Bezmenov said, right? That in the late stages of ideological subversion, we wouldn't be able to draw sensible conclusions in our own defense. So that's kind of where we are now, I guess, headed more towards normalization.
And then when you talk about media, I see huge Chinese ownership now, even in Hollywood. They own entire studios, massive. People have other ideas about who owns Hollywood, but China has a major influence over movies, network television, radio.
Yeah,
they've bought up a lot of our media.
The sheer size of their markets is what drives a lot of that too. And they know it, they use it, right? So yeah, they have a lot of influence. It's a lot of soft power. That's what they're all about, really. But it's still just as devastating. I mean, we've already suffered more casualties in this war than all the wars of the 20th century combined. But it's a silent war, and it's an invisible war. So, it's ideological ultimately, and I think that's what we have to do. Like, the subtitle in Unrestricted Warfare is "The Battle Space is Everywhere." So, or actually, I think I just blocked that quote. But anyway, it's the battle space is everywhere. So when the battle space is everywhere, we are all soldiers, and so. People, I think, I use the Matrix analogy, right? So, and people are talking like red pill, blue pill. Do you know who coined that phrase? That was John Brother and Paul Elam on a Voice for Men podcast back in like 2012. And that was sort of my actual sort of path to awakening too. I was like, this feminism is bullshit, right? Like, and I read a few really great authors, even Canadian authors like. What are their names? Catherine Young and Paul Nathanson. They did a great series on misandry, as in hatred of males. Anyway, and that was where I first got exposed to this idea of cultural Marxism, and that's what third and fourth wave feminism are. Is they're a culturally Marxist view on gender, where instead of the bourgeois and proletariat in Marx's economic class struggle, the classes are now like the gender classes is the class struggle. It's men are the bourgeois, they're the oppressor, and women are the oppressed. And really all they do is they point to any disparity of outcome between groups and then say that is proof of oppression. But there are obvious, sociologic reasons for why we see disparity between groups. And in men and women, I mean, there's the obvious physical ones, but one that the feminist harpies are always bitching about is the STEM fields. That the STEM fields are dominated by men, but the IQ curves, the bell curves for the sexes are different. The average is the same; it's 100 for whites anyway, and the female IQ curve is shaped like a penis, and the male IQ curve is shaped like a breast. So female IQ curve, it's really high in the middle. It's got a really high peak, so they tend to congregate around the average of about 100. Male IQ curve shaped like a breast, so it's much more spread out. So there are fewer at the average, and there are more in the lower range where we see the prison population with an IQ of about 85, and there are also more in the higher range when you get up around the 140 range, which is the STEM field stuff.
So is the goal to be the nipple?
How about free the nipple?
I'm sorry.
Free the nipple.
I couldn't resist. I just well, it's at the peak, right?
Good place to be.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Can we go back to the economic warfare issue just
Sure.
for a moment? BRICS nations, to me, that is an economic assault.
Absolutely, 1,000%. And what they really started the strategy with, I guess, the OG for the economic warfare was the Belt and Road Initiative, and it's modeled on the old Silk Road, because they had Silk Roads that went all the way to Rome, for trading purposes, and they always had the best silk and the best tea, and that's what the British wanted from them. When they got into a war that the Chinese say are about opium, but it wasn't really, it was about treating Britain as an equal power, but we still teach in our schools that it was about opium. So that should tell you like just how far down the rabbit hole we are here. But with the economic warfare, the OG was the Belt and Road Initiative, and that was really successful in places like Africa, and into something like the Kyrgyzstan area, Southwest Asia, around there. So they've been really successful in sort of scooping up economic satellites through their Belt and Road Initiative. And now you have, of course, BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So all the commies, but not India really. And Brazil, I don't know if they're coming back this time, but I hope so. Oh man, the massive protests down there. I'm really hopeful for them. But you see, it's the same strategy everywhere. They're taking all the pieces at the same time. And that's elite capture. What's going on in Brazil, but. And the BRICS, I was thrilled to see the great Donald say that he's put 100% tariff on anybody that tried to replace the U.S. dollar as the world's preferred currency. It's just been like home run after home run, and he's not even the president yet. So,
do you think that would even be effective, though? To me, it seems like the wrong. I mean, from a PR perspective, I get it, but I'm not sure tariffs are there is the right tool to use to combat that. But
I love it. I mean, that's diplomacy, right? It's very aggressive diplomacy, but it keeps, people in uniform alive. Like, no more foreign wars. Like, sign me up, man. Like, we've been at war my entire adult life. I'm exhausted. First Afghanistan, then Iraq, now the Canadian Communist coup. I haven't missed a war yet, guys. Jesus, So,
but this BRICS nation, the BRICS nations, that to me also is an extension of what they're referring to as this axis of resistance, which is these same countries, including Iran, and some others. What's your view on the axis of resistance?
Well, you can tell from the language, it's Marxist, right? Like the resistance, like they're casting themselves as the oppressed class, and they're called to revolution. Workers, the world unite, as Marx said. I think that was the subtitle of the Communist Manifesto. But the thing that has always kind of been the key issue, the question about BRICS is, can these nations actually work together? Because you're taking a bunch of low trust societies and trying to get this powerful alliance just juggernauting along, but it's just not that simple. The fact of the matter is, most of these people hate each other, and they don't work together very well because they're sneaky, man. Like, look at the shady Chinese, and that they're all about being shady. They're proud of their shade. These it's hard to work with these kinds of societies, and they don't really seem to be actually getting much done. So, I think now that the great Donald is back, BRICS is more or less finished.
And it seems to me that they have a very steep hill to climb, because any way you slice it, these countries are still integrated into the global economy, which is still dominated by the US dollar. China in particular they are connected to the US and Canada, their economy, symbiotically. I mean, they produce so much of what we consume, and
They don't
we
think like
trade
us.
so much back and forth. I can't imagine that they really want to, crash the U.S. economy when it's their biggest market.
Yeah, they're notoriously hubristic, though, and they're still butthurt from getting their asses kicked by the British in the 1842 wars, commonly referred to as the Opium Wars. But there's a Harvard working paper out there called "The Opium War That Wasn't," and basically it says opium wasn't mentioned in the parliamentary debate. It's not in the transcript anywhere. Not even mentioned by the opposition. Wasn't mentioned in the declaration for war, wasn't mentioned in the treaties that they signed with Beijing. There was opium involved. It was a part of a much larger cache of goods. They were acting as interlocutors between the Indians and the Chinese, because if you're going to deal with the Chinese, you're going to need a navy. And they're dicks. They're ethno-supremacists, ethno-nationalists. It harkens back basically to the Yellow Emperor, which is historical but almost folklore at the same time. And this is so the Emperor of China, because they're sort of surrounded by weaker neighbors, and they have been their entire existence. It's always been the case, like historically, way back ancient times, that kings visiting, like the surrounding kingdoms, were always subordinate to the Emperor of China. And kings visiting the emperor would have to do the kowtow, where they prostrate themselves in front of the emperor and touch their forehead to the ground 3 times. That's where the word kowtow comes from. It's all about kissing their asses, because they're ethno-supremacists. Anyway, they tried that with the British, and the British drove all the way up the river to Beijing and kicked their asses in pretty short order, and made them sign a treaty that gave them a place to dock their ships, which is one of the things the Chinese wouldn't let them do, because they're dicks and they intern their citizens. And stories about women and children getting abused by Chinese authorities made their way back to Britain. They might have been exaggerated a little bit, but that was what really sparked the war. It was more like chivalry than anything. But they got Hong Kong. They got the treaty that gave them Hong Kong so they could dock their ships, and they set up an embassy. So, if the authorities were messing with their citizens, they could retreat to the embassy for, protection and whatnot. So, and then now Hong Kong, it looks like, when it became an economic powerhouse and had a hell of a lot to do with China's own economic success. And of course, they've imported a lot of capitalist mechanisms into their economy. Mm-hmm. They're allowing it to do its thing to drive it, but it's more like a fascist model, where even the CEOs are still like subordinate to Xi Jinping. And there was that guy that disappeared there a couple of years ago because he was like insufficiently effusive toward what is their people
the head of Alibaba. Yeah, I think it was the guy.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So that all started with, really Nixon, as he was trying to, foster better relations with China. And there was hope that they would become more westernized as their economy became more integrated with ours. But it hasn't really quite worked out that way. Instead, we seem to have a lot of unrest, instability in our country now as a result, I think, of what you're talking about. Yeah. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, every point of contact that we have with them is one that we're going to exploit. I remember reading Nixon's comments on this, and I think like he had the right idea, but failed to appreciate just how deeply rooted the art of war is. Like their Bible. It's older than the Bible, so that's what we're up against. And they don't, you have to understand that we Westerners are kind of the oddballs in the world. Like the free mind is not, it's the exception. It's not the rule. So as we can see, but yeah, so they're stifled, though, is the thing. In an authoritarian system, the number one rule is always never outshine the master. And so it tends to hold people back from innovating and that kind of thing. If you just look at things like patents per capita between them and South Korea, which is a good kind of jump off point to the Vietnam piece, because Nixon, of course, was making this deal in the wake of Vietnam, and they had already fought China in Korea from 50 to 53. And they actually, I mentioned that the game Go, that's a good example of, like, they really think this way, because the Americans, they dispatched the Koreans like in short order, but the CCP that had just won the revolution, I could get into, like, it was kind of, they were greaseballs, they snuck in 300,000 infantrymen. 300,000 infantry, they snuck in through the jungle on foot. And the intelligence actually got back to General McAllister, and he didn't believe it. He's like, no, that can't be true. So they surrounded the Americans in North Korea, like in the bushes, and then bam, attacked all at once and drove them out of North Korea. And that's how we ended up with the DMZ and this intractable situation that is now modern North Korea. And that's a bit of an oxymoron, but and in Vietnam, it was kind of more of the same. Like, they were the Viet Cong were the communists that were being backed by the CCP, and they had the chance to contain them. That's the thing. But this was the Vietnam War, and I'm going to go into my fourth turning shtick now, because it was the boomers who were up at bat, and they're the guys that are at peak institutional power right now, behind every scandal in Canada's military. And in Vietnam, they murdered over 850 of their own officers for trying to lead them in combat. They throw grenades into their bunks at night. It was a practice called fragging, named for the fragmentation grenades. The Pentagon said they were the most undisciplined generation of soldiers they'd ever seen. They never kept statistics on fratricide previously, but then they tracked over, like I said, 850 incidents of them murdering their own officers, and then they butchered the peasants in My Lai, for an entire morning without even so much as encountering weapons cache or a fighting age male. And they became Rudy Deutschke. There was all this radicalism with the Weather Underground, the Summer of Love, the East Germany. A lot of the same thing was going on. It was Rudy Deutschke in East Germany who called for the Long March through the institutions. That was reference to Mao's Long March when he retreated up to northwest China, as the nationalists fought the invading Japanese. They drove out the Japanese, and then before they could reconstitute, you had a reconstituted communist army coming out of the north, and they drove them out of the south to Taiwan, where they've been ever since. And Taiwan's that's a big part. I think this is the biggest part of it. Pardon me if you don't mind me just jumping onto this, and Vietnam, that's another. The thing is, that gave them access to the Golden Triangle. That's where 90% of the world's heroin comes from. And so, that's where the big circle boys and all these triads and stuff, like, that's their supply. Like, this is the big picture, you see. They have that now, and we're now feeling the impacts of that, years later, 50 years later. So, with their drug warfare strategy. So, but yeah, Nixon, he said something about, we can't allow them to, persist isolated in their own prejudices and things like this, because they are ridiculously racist. Have you ever seen that Chinese laundry detergent commercial where the Chinese woman puts a black eye in the washing machine and he comes out Chinese? That is like,
I have, yeah.
That's a chef's kiss, perfect racism. They're unabashedly racist, and they're gaslighting us for being racist. We're the least racist society in the history of the world, and Canada in particular. And there's a report out there called "The Party Speaks for You." I think it's like cyber intelligence something, blah blah blah. But they say right in there that the Chinese use racism to drive wedges and to wage psychological warfare. And we're all guilty of genocide with respect to indigenous populations. But of course, the truth is much more complex and more bloody than that. And
Well, the thing is, it's like when I listen to you, I mean, I'm very much in tune with what you're saying, because when I see people in our chat every night, or I speak to people, phone me, or I just get engaged in conversations, there's this self-loathing that is out there right now. It's people, if even just 4-5 years ago, people were upset if they saw a statue torn down, if they saw history being rewritten. But now it has turned to the point where people are embarrassed about their country. Even people who, I think 4 or 5 years ago, would have been upset to see a statue torn down, now they're applauding it. It's like something has happened to people's minds. What the heck is going on?
So like this, I mentioned the fourth turning. So this is the crisis era that we go through every 4 generations. The last one being World War II. Before that, it was the American Civil War. And before that, it was the American Revolution. And before that, it was the Salem witch trials. And so we see these same trends recur, social trends recur over and over again. And it's always the generation born in the wake of the previous major crisis, when they reach peak institutional power, like demographically, in their early elderhood, just prior to retirement, when everybody's at the peaks of their careers. We get this, tyranny. And even social trends like, say, Aldous Huxley identified the sexualization of children as kind of a natural constituent of tyranny. They had to engage in erotic play at school. Sound familiar? So that's why we see the Orwellian duck speak. That's why we see all of these kinds of social trends recur. And the reason right now is because the boomer generation is peak institutional power, and they're communists, basically. They're the commies, the radicals from the 70s that, were the Weather Underground and the Summer of Love and the Black Panthers. And they didn't disappear. They're still basically the same people. And that's, human beings. We don't fundamentally change. At best, we grow. And so now we have a class of professors, a generation of professors that are radically communist, and they're indoctrinating a generation of young people, into an anti-Western worldview. The decolonization narrative started as Soviet propaganda. They've been doing this since World War II to drive Western colonies out of the Middle East and Africa, and they've had a lot of success with it. And the fact of the matter is that Western colonialism, all the best countries to live in are former Western colonies, and Western colonialism was probably the best thing to happen to the world prior to the New World liberal order post-World War II. It was overwhelmingly an emancipation effort. The British didn't even stamp out the last of the cannibalism until 1920s, where in Papua New Guinea, the relevant degustative experience was known as long pig. So that's what we really think about other people, and our adversaries know that. So they know deep down we all just want to tear each other apart. So they sow this chaos. We have the Chinese have the we're talking about the universities, so I'll point to the Confucius Institutes. I read Confucius. There's some good stuff in there, but ultimately he's a servant of the state. This is the kind I want to point to the culture again, the way they think, right? They think very differently than we do. They use these Confucius Institutes to leverage the Chinese students, and also to radicalize them into this anti-Western worldview. So you have this kind of these factors that are confluencing together, where we're under a psychological attack from China, and at the same time we have a communist generation of professors that are indoctrinating a generation of young people into this anti-Western worldview that started as Russian propaganda, with Soviet propaganda, the decolonization thing. And you can see the same narrative around Israel, for example, right? It's the same damn narrative. They're and they've been doing that since they realized that Israel was going to ally with the West. They don't want Western colonies in the Middle East and Africa. They want all that to exploit for themselves. So so it's colonization. They're the colonizers, and the Palestinians, so-called. I mean, they're just Arabs, and the pan-Arab colors are on their flag. They're just as Palestinian as they are Jordanian or Egyptian, and they've formed this narrative. Yasser Arafat, of course, is the guy who came up with it, of oppressor oppressed. And I mean, just look at what it'll drive people to do, right? That's another one that started as Soviet propaganda, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And I hear a lot of people saying that there's the reptilian shape-shifting Zionist overlords are controlling the world. But again, I'm going to say, like, this is a Marxist narrative, because they're just pointing to a disparity in outcome between groups and saying the more successful group is the oppressor and the less successful group is the oppressed. It's basically third wave feminism, just repackaged for wannabe base chads. It's just that the Zionists are the patriarchy, and the white man is women. It's the same damn explanation. It's Marxist. So. I know that there's all kinds of like conspiracy theories around that too, and I know them well, actually. So, and they're bunk, but what can I tell you? But they're fun. I enjoy kind of going down the rabbit holes and stuff like that.
A lot of people taking it very seriously these days, though. I
know it's maybe we live in interesting times. What can I say? But look, the thing is. I'll tell you what, I don't excommunicate. I'm not woke. I'm not in any cults. And, nobody's banished. And as far as I'm concerned, I'll talk to anybody because where the conversation stops, that's where the fighting begins. I would caution anybody, against against canceling people for expressing their views right now. I mean, we've never been lied to on a scale like this before. So people are looking for answers, and they're coming to get some erroneous conclusions, and I don't really fault them for it. I fell for it. I thought the same thing back in the 2000s and around 2009, 2010. I just said, maybe there's something. Why don't more people believe this? I thought I was basically the only guy, and then I just kind of started looking at the other side, some debunking videos and stuff. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this is bunk. But it was an interesting ride. I'll tell you that. And what lies at the bottom of every rabbit hole is confirmation bias. And what they do is they point to, there's all these Jews in these positions of power. It's the same thing. It's the patriarchy. But there are also all these Jews, 22% of the Nobel Prizes, 28% in physics in particular. And the disparity, again, is due to IQ differences between these groups. Yeah. Jews are one full standard deviation above whites. That's about 15 IQ points. That's substantial. That's basically the difference between whites and blacks. And look at the prison population when it comes to blacks. I'm sorry, guys. I'm not endorsing racism. You never ever treat an individual in accordance with the prejudice associated with a group to which they belong. Everybody's judged on their own individual merits. I'm an individualist. I'm a right winger. Everybody gets a fair crack. But the reason these social trends exist and the need to have this uncomfortable conversation is because the Marxists are looking at every disparate outcome between groups and saying that's proof of oppression. No, it isn't. There's already a perfectly cromulent sociologic explanation available, and it's because there are IQ differences between these populations.
Yeah, and in some cases, other dynamics as well.
Yeah.
Social issue. Yeah, cultural things. It can be a variety of things. I mean, women have babies and men don't. So there's an example, right?
That's transphobic.
Oh, I'm sorry.
see, that would be an example of a dialectical attack. Cancel culture. It's Marxist. It's the Marxist dialectical materialism.
Yeah, and so what we're seeing on our streets now is protests constantly, and these protests include flag burnings and people chanting death to Canada, death to America, death to Israel.
I've
That's
been
what it's
warning
come
about
to.
this since 2009. So I'm like, I've seen this coming like 15 years away. And yeah, so there's this unholy alliance, not just in Canada, but globally, of the communists and the Islamists, both, all the anti-Western civilizational forces are aligning, and through the Marxist praxis of intersectionalism, which is another example of a boomer radical professor, that's Kimberly Crenshaw, and it's a Marxist praxis. It's the intersectionality, right? And you can see it's a spoke wheel, and the horizontal spoke in the center is the line of dominance, and all the spokes coming out of the top are the lines of oppressor, and underneath are the lines of oppressed. And so things like man, woman, woman is oppressed, man is oppressor, and gendered people are oppressing, LGBTQAIP ampersand asterisks, and and so through this, the lens of intersectionality, we see this kind of what I'm calling Islamunism has formed, queers for Palestine. So it makes no sense unless you're a Marxist. Their minds are not operating on the same software as ours. We're operating on logic. You have to forget about that. They're not doing that. Okay, you have to understand that they're operating on a completely different operating system. So that's why you see queers for Palestine, because they're Marxists, and it makes sense if you understand intersectionality. These are oppressed classes that, and Marx said that Marxists support every revolution. And so they're coalescing into these, kind of thesis meets antithesis, and you get synthesis into this Islamunist threat now, which is probably, I don't know, might even be the number one threat to Canadian stability right now. And we've brought in, what was it, 40,000 Syrians. People naively believe that the rest of the world's mind works like ours does. It doesn't. They're still stuck on their default setting of totalitarian. So yeah, I mean, look, I worked with the Muslims when I was in Afghanistan and Iraq, and they're all like great dudes, amazing people risking their lives. I met a guy in Iraq who got his green card from the Americans after the sixth attempt on his life from the Ba'athist Party, that one being a car bomb that he survived. So yeah, like there are a lot of incredible guys that don't want to continue in this Old Testament lifestyle. Absolutely. But the polling data is not encouraging. Let's put it that way. Pew Research, even in a country like Iraq, man. I mean, I thought it was pretty cool. The people I worked with were super cool while I was there. I love the Kurds. The Kurds are great people. Can we bring some of them here? Peshmerga, they're pretty cool. They drive around those white Mercedes with the gold-plated AK-47 in the trunk. They're right on.
Why are they so focused on Canada? Is it our position right next to the U.S. and that would be this would be like to capture the U.S. That would be the crown jewel, but Canada would be second best.
And you have to understand, they're claiming a consistent history going back 5,000 years. So to them, just the last couple hundred years of global Western dominance is a bump in the road. They call it, they actually call it the 100 years humiliation, the time from them losing the so-called Opium Wars to the Communist Revolution. And this is their redemption period now. So they're back on the rise. I mean, I don't know if we could say they're a rising superpower anymore. I think China has risen. Well, I guess it's like I just keep saying, it's they don't really think like we do, and they're thinking in terms of the Yellow Emperor. They're trying to globalize the Yellow Emperor, where it's not just the surrounding kingdoms that need to pay homage to the Yellow Emperor in Beijing, but the entire world. So they're trying to bring us all under their boots, by hook or by crook. And it's an effective strategy. Like their military, I think everybody knows, is probably a paper tiger, probably. Especially like their standing army, like I said, they don't match up to the Indian army. So and you see this with a lot of authoritarian regimes. The militaries are really only good for kind of oppressing their own citizens, and they're not so good at fighting wars. North Korea showed up was it you I was talking to? I did an interview with somebody about that. North Korea was going to Ukraine, and I was like, no, I'm not worried about the North Korean military. And they're like, really? Like they have like, a million-man standing army? And I was like, yeah, but they're like a foot shorter than South Koreans. And well, as we discovered when they got there, they'd never seen porn before. So whoever didn't defect ended up spending the war jerking off. And it was just a freaking disaster. So we have that going for us. But, it's just they're inciting civil war effectively is what they're doing, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And that's going to be a real struggle, a real emotionally taxing struggle. I think it's our own people involved in doing this to us as well. And
yes.
I'm not just talking about the parliamentarians, like they're like Trantifa scumbags and stuff like this. It's like I said, their operating system has been replaced. And I don't know what to do about that.
Yeah, this has all resulted in extreme polarization, and now we're fighting with each other and destroying ourselves, which is really what they want, right?
Well, and it's also another one of those, recurring social trends of the cycle of history too. Like it's a Tower of Babel. They're all kind of talking past each other. Our minds aren't really able to meet in any kind of objective reality anymore. And that's analogous to the collapse of the West Roman Empire that, balkanized into European countries to various fiefdoms and kingdoms. Mm-hmm. And it used to be the case that there were two official languages, around an empire that surrounded the entire Mediterranean, and that was Latin and Greek. And as long as you spoke one of them, you could make your way anywhere in the empire. And then the West Empire collapsed, and we ended up with all the different European languages with Greek and Latin roots. So it is part of the natural cycle of history, like I say. And we just need to think our way through this, very carefully, right? My whole sign-off line when I was podcasting, I haven't been lately because I've been so busy with my legal and political stuff, but when I was doing that, it was, stay frosty, don't panic. It is supposed to be emotionally distressing, and that's how propaganda works. It manipulates your emotions, and this is why this grievance culture really works. This is what the Russians were doing in the Middle East and Africa. I'm positive the Chinese are doing the same thing to us, especially around the colonialist narrative and the residential schools. And they're radicalizing indigenous populations too. They're who I don't know who's burning the churches, but anyway, I worry because there was the whole thing with the blocking the railroads there and the Idle No More and stuff like that. And it's like, man, we're supposed to be allies, guys. We fought world wars together, Korea, Afghanistan, Iraq. Come on. We're allies. They're pitting us against each other is what they're doing. And they're getting what they always do is they give you the one side. They give you one side of history, and it's always the bad stuff and exaggerated. And a lot of what's being taught in schools goes back to a card-carrying commie bastard by the name of Howard Zinn in the United States. He was an American communist. And he wrote a book called A People's History of the United States. And he quote mined Columbus's diary, for example, and he took sentences that weren't actually together on the same day in his diary, and made it look like they were things that they weren't. Like he would say, he was talking about one, I can't remember the name of the tribe, but one, he said that they could easily be subjugated and they would make fine servants. And he uses that to show like this malice that Columbus had towards the indigenous populations, but in fact the opposite is true. And he was saying that in context because they had a lot of trouble with a neighboring tribe that were always cannibalizing them. So he actually left an envoy to help defend them, and he was concerned with the fate of their immortal souls. He wanted them to be Christians, of course. He was a man of his era, and he ordered his own men to treat them well, and when they didn't, he punished them. But our whole history has been rewritten just in Orwell's first pages. The first pages of 1984, it says, and the whole paradigm's been flipped. Good is evil, and evil is good. And again, like the conquistadors, for example, in South America, like they went up against the Aztec Empire. They toppled the Aztec Empire. They were voracious, like human sacrificers. They dispatched 80,000 in one ceremony. People, yes, they murdered 80,000 people in one ceremony to the god Quetzalcoatl. And the reason that the 500 conquistadors were able to overthrow them wasn't because they had horse cavalry, but because the neighboring tribes were sick of being cannibalized. So they all banded together and overthrew the Aztecs. But there were cannibalistic tribes in the United States, like in the Southwest, and slavers in the Northwest. The Cornwallis statue is a good example, right? There was the whole Proud Boys thing that first came on the scene. The Halifax Five, there were military guys that got thrown under the bus for just saying, hey, Canada's a really good country on Canada Day, while a couple of boomer females were in the park with a indigenous boomer female that went by the name Chief Grizzly Mama, doing a head shaving ceremony, like shaming Cornwallis for the scalping bounty, but that was a retaliation. You see, that's what they do, is they start the narrative with the retaliation. They the fact of the matter was that a guy named Jean-Louis Leloup was paying the Micmac for what was it? It was like 2,000 francs per Anglo scalp, and so Cornwallis retaliated, and reinforcements were brought in from England. They fired Cornwallis because they thought he didn't act quickly enough. They murdered too many Anglos as it was. They don't tell you that side of it, though. They only start with the retaliation, and we could see that real time with the Israel-Hamas war. Like, yes, there was an October 7th massacre. We are now seeing a retaliation that still hasn't resulted in the release of the hostages, let alone the destruction of Hamas. It's got to go. But anyway, CBC will say Israel started the war. I had that quote. I showed it on a live stream one time, and CTV ran pictures of civilian casualties during the Hanukkah report, things like this. Like the institutions are Marxist, so they're looking at this a completely different way, where good is evil and evil is good. And
it's defiance. It's a rejection of reality, and I'm my mind is blown. And now we're seeing even our own government infiltrated. And what do you make of that? Where does that leave us? Because our system, for whatever reason, seems to be failing us. It's skewed somehow because we have CSIS and the RCMP telling us that this is going on, and yet we are not able to find out who these members of parliament are who are being influenced by foreign powers. How can this possibly be happening?
Well, sorry, boomers, but you guys are running the institutions. They're the generation in charge, and it's the yuppie generation. They're just kind of superficial, buzzword, like throwing, sniffing sycophants. And, they kissed a lot of ass to get where they are today, and they expect the rest of us to be the same. And when they find out that we're not, that's tantamount to insubordination, insufficient fealty, really. They ran that military like a goddamn gang, the whole time I was there. They didn't follow their own rules. They were ordered by the commissioner into the Somalia affair. They were the ones who gave the orders to shoot between the skirts and the flip-flops with respect to fleeing Somalian peasant children who were stealing supplies and unarmed. But anyway, they and like I said, the guy who pinned my first campaign star for Afghanistan, General Maynard, and he ended up getting fired from Afghanistan, returned to unit, as we say, RTU, because he negligently discharged his weapon in front of his troops, the guys that he's supposed to court-martial when they do that, and not because he was playing hide the commissioning scroll with the civilian admin assistant, but because he negligently discharged his weapon a second time, this time right in front of the chief of defense staff. So that's what's going on across the board now. You see, they reach peak institutional power in the military first because of the lower retirement age and the high rate of attrition. And what they seem to be doing across the board is they created all these new general positions for their pals to take them along with them. They raised the retirement age to 60. We were already the oldest, fattest military, Ralph Wiggum of NATO. And so you see the same thing like in healthcare. There's all these administrative positions that just, what do we need all this for? And even, this city hall, the senior bureaucrats are taking these enormous salaries across the board. They're most expensive. Like, look at Catherine Tate. Oh my God! Like, could you be any more entitled? And I'll point to the Porta Peak shooting, where Brenda Lucky came and she admonished her senior officers or investigating officers.
That's the RCMP commissioner.
Yeah, that's right, RCMP commissioner. And she admonished the investigating officers for not releasing the types of firearms used at the press conference because the minister wants to stand on the still warm bodies of these children to advance the Liberals' disarmament agenda. Communists also, by the way, absolutely. And it's very much in line with, UN doctrine, like the UN Compact on Disarmament. So yeah, they're fully communist as well. And Brenda Lucky was just beside herself that she had to feel so embarrassed in front of the minister, and everybody let her down, and they let the boys down too, as in the two young boys who were murdered. Like, just, oh my God, like, how low can you go? Like, this, it's just despicable. And it was all because she wanted to look good for the minister. So they're image obsessed yuppies they're running these institutions, and they've probably never had a moment of courage in their lives, because it's George Costanza is, he back in the 90s, like, George Costanza, he was kind of mitigated because he had to report to somebody. But nowadays, he teaches journalism at Harvard under the name Brian Stelter. So I think Brian Stelter is actually younger than me. But anyway, you get the idea. But so yeah, you got the radical communist professors and the yuppies right next door. Everything the radical communist professors feed to the yuppies, they're like, oh yeah, this is serious academia. And shame on all of you for your rape culture, they'll say to us, even though their rate was double when they were in the 15 to 39 age category. And that's why we all have to do this training. It's because they had a Somalia affair and they had all these sexual misconduct scandals. It's not the rest of us. They're the ones who can't behave, right up to General Vance. Like, he was the guy who cemented his final legacy by upping the retirement age to become the longest serving CDS in the history of the CAF, and implemented op honor to tell the rest of us to honor up and stop seeing such sexual miscreants and abusers, and here he was one of the worst offenders the entire time. He had 2 kids using his own staff officers for Kleenex, and he's never even acknowledged them. So that's the kind of leadership that I've had to look up to, and we have across the board, whether it's the police forces, the military, the press, the PMO, the PCO, like Michael Wernick, first clerk of the Privy Council office, to resign in disgrace. It's the senior bureaucrats. I can't even see Justin Trudeau's fingerprints on, say, the Arrive scam scandal. Like, I don't think he had anything to do with that. It was all senior bureaucrats lining their own pockets. And they did the same thing in the military. They were stealing everything that wasn't nailed down when I first got there. That's what they're doing across the board. It's like, I think it's like Julius Caesar, right? Where everybody in charge is just engaged in this power struggle. That's what they do, is they form the factions in their early lives that struggle for dominance throughout their midlives, and when they reach peak institutional power in their early elderhoods, those are the factions that drive us to total war. So that's why we see like the communist element of it, and China in particular. They're very Sinophilic, I guess, because that was the adversary that their daddies expected them to contain, so they didn't get access to the Golden Triangle in Vietnam. They're like, no, communism is it's just never been implemented properly, and China is the obviously the superior civilization. Barack Obama said like it was inevitable that we'd all be taking orders from them. So I think that, again, it's like all of these things are confluencing together. We're in a fourth turning. China has risen, so this appears to be the center of gravity. They use, rogue states like Russia and Iran as proxies. Iran has its own proxies. Like Russia is taking a beating right now in Ukraine, but really like everybody who was bought off to drive us into that war was bought off by the Chinese, Joe Biden in particular. And it appears to me to be a money laundering operation that is also intended to deplete NATO of all of its blood and treasure, just in time for China to do a full-scale invasion of Taiwan. Whether or not they could pull it off is, still debatable, but they've been exercising it since the fentanyl overdose of George Floyd. So, and Xi Jinping says that reunification, by which he means invasion, is inevitable. And if they get access to that, that's the jugular vein of the world's economy, right? That's 80% of the world's advanced chip manufacturing, which gives us the strategic advantage because the Taiwanese will not sell to the Chinese or authoritarian regimes, our adversaries. They support the West. And about 80% of the world's cargo shipping goes through the Strait of Taiwan. So if they control that, I mean, yeah, we'll be taking orders from them. For a little while anyway. Of course, localism defeats globalism. So nationalism, if we just go back to adopt a more self-sufficient kind of mentality and keep our friends really close, like focus on our allies instead of the Chinese. What the hell, man? Like every engagement with them is a trap. That's just how they think, I'm afraid.
So what do we, in your estimation, need to do? We need to bring more of our manufacturing back. We need to reclaim ownership of a greater percentage of our media to prevent foreign, I guess, propaganda from being distributed on the scale that it's being shared with us now. We have to, I guess, deal with each one of these elements in an individual way. What do you think we can do to fight back or defend ourselves against this?
Yeah, that's a mouthful. But again, like it's primarily soft power. So because
this is fifth generation warfare, right?
Yeah, that's the fancy word everybody's using these days, but it's just an upgrade. So for the modern battle space, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are all kinds of things that we can do. Obviously, we got to decouple from China. I'm ready to like close the embassy. They got frickin' these police stations set up. That's part of Operation Fox Hunt, where they round up dissidents, to persecute them in Chinese prisons, and they use them to leverage the diaspora, and to do their bidding here in Canada, so they can get them onto buses to vote in leadership races and stuff like this, because that was all Han Dong through the Chinese consulate, right? So anyway, so yeah, I'm like, freaking close the embassy and reclaim our assets. Like we have the right of appropriation, our government does in Canada, so they shouldn't be gobbling up all our natural resources. I own the fisheries, like the lobster fishery out here in Nova Scotia, and when somebody raised a concern, guess what they said? They said it was a bit of racist. So yeah, that's the CCP telling everybody to shut up and behave while we steal your children's future. So I think we need to divest of all of this, all of their investments, and send everybody packing. It would take, I hate this word, but something like a whole of government approach with, some kind of a joint task force being set up between RCMP, CSIS, the military, they would, easier said than done. I know the military is decimated. That's part of attack by stratagem, chapter 3 in the art of war. Better to capture the enemy's forces whole or intact. So that's what they've done, is they've ideologically captured them and purged the ranks of all the true loving patriots who had the courage to stand up and say there was something wrong with the vaccine mandate. So you see the force becomes less and less like a Western, deontological, duty-bound force, and more like some banana republic authoritarian shithole force that's really only good for oppressing its citizens. And they're doing this at the same time that they're opening up the ranks to foreign nationals and indoctrinating the force into a post-Marxist, anti-Western worldview that's got all of the institutional racism. What is that? Well, Ibram X. Kendi says institutional racism is, racism that's part of the institution or something like that. I don't know. It's a bunch of nonsense, and it's a shaming struggle session, right? I was there for the first training session. I was like, all right, let's just see how they implement this. And it was worse than I fucking anticipated, man. It was ridiculous. Like one guy, and I'm talking about a senior officer here, asked a question, a sincere question. He was just kind of a really nice guy, sweet guy, very Christian. And he asked a sincere question about, he said, I feel like I'm doing something wrong. Like, I don't want to be doing something wrong. Could somebody just sort of explain what I'm doing wrong? And then it turned into this, you can't, you don't understand this? Well, what's going on? Why are you asking a question like this? And he's like, well, because my church is multicultural, multi-ethnic. We come from all over the world, and everybody gets together, and we have these kind of different takes on Christianity, and we like to talk about how our culture, affects our Christianity and stuff like that. He says, I'm interested in other cultures, and I like to ask people about their cultures and their origins, when I'm getting to know them. So am I mistreating them? Is that racist? And it went all the way down to this, they were accusing him of lowering his subordinate score because I think he was Haitian or something like that. And lowering his subordinate score because of his unconscious bias. They just picked up these buzzwords in this presentation, and it already polarized the senior most group at the unit, the most highly educated, oldest, wisest, most experienced. And I remember I stepped in and I was like, oh, that's not what I heard Chris say at all. And they were like, oh, a bit, and they were like, oh no, what did you hear, Jeff? And I said, I heard that Chris performed gender-based analysis plus on his subordinate and determined that his cultural background was intercepting with his military background in a way that reinforced his aggressive leadership style. And he was like, yes, that's it. And I was like, yeah, guys, like you just made us do this goddamn GBA plus training last year. Like we just did the intersectionality last year. That was the Marxist indoctrination that we got last year. And now you've completely turned it on its head and we're all institutionally racist for applying it. Give me a break. It's just polarizing, demoralizing. And they go, oh, I don't know why you're having a Christian crisis. I can't imagine why, guys. It's because you're socially abusing the force every day, ruthlessly, and it's damaging. Like this is it's psychological warfare that they're waging on their own troops, you know. So, but
it's important. Sorry, go ahead.
We need to fire the boomers. We got to get them out of DND. We got to get them out of the university, out of the police forces. You know, and that is how the fourth turning resolves. It's when the Gen X specifically displaces the boomers from peak institutional power, and Gen Z enters voting age, because they're sick of this shit too. They're really sick of it, and they're coming out based.
So, the real solution is just to wait it out.
Well, obviously, I'm trying to speed it up. Just by talking about it and running for office and going to court and doing protests and podcasts and all of this stuff. I think so. What happens after the fourth turning is we go back to the first turning. The first turning is the high. That's like, you know, new technologies, higher standards of living than the world has ever seen. Last time it happened, post World War II era. All our technology is fundamentally the same. It hasn't fundamentally changed. It's just that the manufacturing has improved. So the components got smaller and the networks got bigger. That's really the only difference, except for mRNA. I would say that's a new technology, but everything else is basically the same. That's what we have to look forward to. The original estimate made by Neil Howe, who is the demographer, who forecasted that a major crisis would threaten civilization in the year 2020, plus or minus 2 years, all the way back in 1991. Shoot, I lost my thought there, but he forecasted. And what was I just saying before that? Damn it, I was doing a good weave there.
You kind of lost me. So okay. You're trying to speed things up, and then you mentioned a name.
We just got to get them to retire. We got to get the boomers to retire. And that's what always happens. Gen X follows the generational archetype of the nomad. Boomers follow the generational archetype of the prophet. The prophet is the one who prosecutes the new spiritual awakening of what will become the new religion and the new theocracy, the prophet Muhammad being an example. In the clear light of history, I would also point to all of the patriarchs of the Old Testament, from Yahweh, Abraham, Lot, Moses, you know, and every time you see the elder prophet, the prophet is in his elderhood with a long gray beard, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Gandalf. It's hard times for the rest of us. It's the crisis era, when the factions they formed in their early lives, like Obi-Wan with the Jedi versus the Sith, are the ones that struggle for dominance, and in their elderhood, they drive the rest of us to total war. And that's what Obi-Wan is doing, is he's sending the hero archetype, which is Luke, to settle his old score with the Sith. And that's what I see happening with Russia. It's like, why is everybody obsessed with Russia? Well, that's the boomers' old Cold War adversary. And everything was actually going pretty good with the wall coming down, and we brought them into the G8, and then Hillary Clinton came in there like, you know, I don't like you guys. And now we're on the precipice of World War III with Russia. So,
well, I would take a little exception with that, because I think Putin's a dick, and
but diplomacy works, and they just don't do that.
And well, it doesn't work so well when he's threatening to nuke everybody. So he can take his fucking nukes and stick them up his ass.
Yeah,
and his fear.
I really think NATO provoked him.
Well, we'll agree to disagree to a point on that.
Okay.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, yeah. That's for another discussion. My views on that have really, changed.
I don't
much.
excommunicate. Like I said.
That's cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's like we need to get back to a place where we can engage in this kind of civilized debate.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't expect ideological homogeneity with me
Right.
in order to have a conversation. As a matter of fact, I like to talk about the things that we disagree about the most. And I've spent, more time with the people that I love most in my life up later and longer, disagreeing than I ever did, just, I don't know. How do you just sit around agreeing all the time? I used to say, like in the military, we'd get to the end of a meeting and I'd throw what we call a grenade, and just kind of ruin everybody's plan. But that was the thing. Like I'd be sitting there and be like, okay, well, there's no point in calling a meeting if we're all just going to get together and agree about everything. So what about this? And then that leads to like a better understanding. People start throwing ideas around, and bad ideas fall away and good ideas come to the fore. So that's why we're the best in the West. It's because we value debate. It's been that way since frickin' Socrates. So
absolutely,
Father of the Enlightenment, nomad generational archetype, same as Gen X, only he's in his elderhood, which is the second turning, and he's watching the next generation of prophets come up into their early lives and prosecuting the new spiritual awakening, and that's sophistry. And that's what we have this resurgence of sophistry, Orwellian newspeak, or whatever it is we're up against now, wokeism, I guess.
Yeah, it's the wokeism that I think is one of the most dangerous aspects of all of this. It's like neo-Marxism. It's a convergence of these ideologies. You referred to it as, what was it, Islamism?
Islamunism.
Islamunism. Yeah. See, I call it communofascism. But I think we're talking about the same thing ultimately, because you have this sort of Islamofascism that's coming together with communism. So I see that kind of convergence. But it's Islam and the Marxists.
Yes. Yeah, 1,000%. And well, I mentioned that the communists, the Russians, the Soviets started the colonialist narrative, the Marxist narrative in the Middle East to destabilize, the region there. And that's really what we see with the these so-called Palestinian protests, which are just Hamas whole protests in my book. They're espousing, essentially, they use Marxist language, and they talk about the colonizers and things like this, right? So there's this convergence of these things. They're confluencing together. Yeah, and it's not good for any of us.
No, it runs contrary to, I think, really what Canada was based on, which is freedom, and individuality, free markets, free speech. All what they advocate for, what they practice in the streets, is really the opposite of that, where they're saying, we now occupy the front lawn of this university and only people we approve of are allowed to walk here. Like, that doesn't fly with me.
Yeah, no Jews allowed in this encampment.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's tyranny, right? I mean, they want to destroy the West. They've been indoctrinated into an anti-Western worldview where we're the oppressor and they're the oppressed. In fact, the opposite is true. And I'll talk a little bit about the opposites, if you don't mind, because this is another. Yeah. This is just kind of a counter-radicalization strategy that I've personally come up with, to sort of help the average citizen, because, like I said, the battle space is everywhere, and we are all soldiers, and it's a Marxist Hegelian dialectical attack is what they're doing. And so that's why it's opposite land, is because they're always throwing the opposite, and the whole paradigm is inverted. And so what we need to do, is the matrix. The matrix is a fourth turning. Okay, we're in a fourth turning. The matrix is a fourth turning. It's a false reality. Who's the midlife nomad? The nomad is always a midlife during the crisis era. That'd be Han Solo in Star Wars, and they're kind of the swashbucklers. They tend to be war veterans, right? We tend to be the ones. Socrates fought the foreign war with Sparta, only to find himself occupied by Sparta, as I'm finding myself by the Mujahideen, So he lived through the great crisis of the occupation of Sparta, and developed a method to counter the sophistry, and it's logic. And so, like, that's what we need to do, is we need to get proficient at logic. But before you go memorizing logical fallacies, because they work, you just call them. They work in the boardroom. I did it my whole career. I dominated the boardroom. I used to say I won that meeting all the time, because I just understood basic logic, a little bit of that. And what I've come up with when it comes to countering the Hegelian dialectical attack is you just take the Hegelian dialectical opposite. You take the antithesis and plug it into a rational argument. So, in the case, let's say, okay, this is a good one. All wars are bankers' wars, right? All wars are planned, something like this. I'm seeing a lot of this, and it's troubling to me because I understand that it originates with the Soviets. But all wars are bankers' wars. So, okay, if all wars are bankers' wars, then let's just strip that down to its very basic, most basic form. We can say bankers cause wars. I think that's what they're implying. This is what they do, is they point to a correlation, and then they leap to a causal factor. And so you see what they do is they'll say, look at this banker and look at that banker, and these guys are all behind the scenes, and so they're the ones that are directing it. That's a correlation. That's not a causal factor. And so what we do is we take the antithesis. We take the direct Hegelian dialectical antithesis of bankers cause wars. So no bankers, no wars, right? If there are no bankers, then there are no wars. So can we point to a time and place when we see this situation? Well, of course. All of human prehistory, there were no bankers, there were no banks, there was no currency. And were there no wars? Well, no. In fact, the opposite is true. It was a nonstop bloodbath the world over. And there are more bankers in the world than there have ever been, and bigger banks than there have ever been. And there are actually fewer wars, believe it or not, with lower casualty rates than they've ever been. And of course, it doesn't make sense when you say, okay, World War I, they made a bunch of money, so they made a bigger war in World War II. But then Korea was way smaller, 53,000 American casualties, over 500,000 in the Second World War. And then lower in Vietnam again. Well, not lower in sheer numbers, but definitely in casualty rate. It was just that it was a 9-year war as opposed to a 3-year war. But yeah, so the exact opposite is true. So if you're engaged with the enemy while believing the claim that bankers cause wars, then you're engaged in a blue pill fight. That's part of the matrix. So that's a good tool, the direct Hegelian dialectical negation of bankers cause wars. You negate that. That's how this process works, is through this process of negation or cancellation. That's where the cancel culture comes from. Aufhebender culture was the motto of the Frankfurt School. That were really preoccupied with Marx's writings on Hegel. That would be like Herbert Marcuse. He came up with the idea of liberating tolerance, which is actually repressive tolerance, because remember, they're Marxists, so everything's the opposite. Repressive tolerance is when it's carte blanche for the left, but intolerance for right-wing movements. And just compare and contrast the Hamas whole demonstrations with the trucker convoy. So, you get crushed if you're trying to demonstrate for anything that's even remotely perceived as being right wing or just counter Marxist, really. But if you're pro-Marxist, then you get carte blanche. And Justin Trudeau even said as much at the Public Order Emergencies Commission. And he was saying that to try to protest. To advocate for a change in government policy, that was unacceptable. But if you were to protest for one of his pet communist causes, like Black Lives Matter or the Fat Ugly Women's March, then that would be acceptable. So it's left-wing causes, carte blanche, and anything even remotely right-wing is repressed.
So we're kind of, I think, getting near the end of the broadcast here. So how can we frame this and provide people with maybe a guide map to a constructive or a positive path forward as we try to survive all of this?
I would strongly recommend. So I gave you the one tool, the direct alien dialectic negation. I should come up with a better. Maybe that should be an acronym. No, it doesn't really work. The Degen. But anyway, there's one. There's one for just identifying whether the information you're getting is actually part of the matrix, the Marxist narrative, or whether it's reality. The others that I would advise would be to just apprise yourself with basic logic. This is how Socrates did it, the Socratic method. Just ask some basic questions, okay, and kind of lead them along down the garden path, lay out the breadcrumbs and stuff like this, and get them to support their position with sufficient evidence. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence and a logical argument. And for that, you should syllogism is what Socrates developed. Major premise, minor premise, and conclusion. So, all dogs are animals, all dogs are mammals, all mammals are animals, so all dogs are animals, right? That's just a really logical major premise, minor premise, conclusion. But all cats are mammals, all if you're to say like all cats are mammals, all cats are animals, therefore all dogs are cats, well, that doesn't follow a logical path. So that's the basic path. And then from there, just start memorizing some logical fallacies. Ad hominem is definitely a favorite of the left and the Marxists in particular, and that's what Mises said about Marx and Engels, is that they never actually refuted anybody. They just called people names and belittled people and stuff like that. So the ad hominem attack, just recognize, like, they're going to try to make it about you. Don't let them make it about you, and don't go on the defense. Don't go on the back foot and start saying, oh no, I'm not that kind of person. Really, I'm a good person. You make it about them. You stay on the front foot and you go right back at them. When they start making it about you, you make it about them. And remember the ironclad law of woke projection. It's all confession through projection with these people. So you can throw that back in their face, no problem. And beyond that, the logical fallacies, like just ad hominem, Texas sharpshooter, which is the correlation that I mentioned earlier. Correlation doesn't prove causation, but they use that to leap to causation. So the Texas sharpshooter is one. The ergo prop, what is it? After hoc, ergo propter hoc, which is after this, therefore because of this. It's a false cause, right? The false cause logical fallacy, where again they're leaping to a conclusion that there's a causal factor, and there's so anyway, just if you can memorize like 10 of those suckers. And just kind of practice maybe identifying them, you'll be unstoppable. Like, just watch these snowflakes melt.
Okay. And Jeff, just finally, if people want to find out more about you or your candidacy and running for the PPC and all of that, how can people find you to learn more?
So nsppceast.ca is our website. And of course, I'm on the People's Party website proper under candidates, and I'm on X as my my real name, PPC candidate for Sydney Glace Bay. So at Jeff Evely on X. I spent a lot of time engaging in that ideological warfare over there. So come at me, boys. Come at me. Come at me, bro.
Okay.
So
and do you think when do you think we're going to the polls? When's the next election? Prediction?
Not until Jack Meek gets his pension.
So you think we're going the distance, are we?
Yeah, I think so. But I'd rather they continue with the no confidence votes, quite frankly. Just at least keep them off balance. And I'm glad that business is shut down for the House, at least. It'll mitigate some damage. I know they're still legislatively active, but at least there are these mitigating factors, like small mercies, right? We gotta take these breaks where we can get them.
Right.
So,
but you're with the PPC and not the CPC because you just don't have faith in Pierre.
Well, absolutely not. Actually, I was Pierre's constituent while I was posted to Ottawa from 2014 to 2021. Voted for him in 2015, 2019, 2021. I voted for the PPC. I have a daughter who got caught up in all the gender ideology stuff while she was under the stewardship of the Ottawa Carleton District School Board, and she's estranged now, and going through the process of transition. So I managed to keep her away from those monsters the whole time she was under my roof, but it's the indoctrination, they spend their formative years really matters. And, what can I say? But I called Pierre, I have the email chain and everything, to let him know what was happening with Bill C4, which was to jail me for 5 years for taking my daughter to see the world's foremost expert on gender dysphoria at the University of Toronto, Ken Zucker. And I was just coming back from that when that bill was in the House, and I called him and explained the whole thing to him, and he went ahead and voted for it anyway. He's not his public-facing persona. He's just an opportunist. And I was one of the co-organizers nationally for the 1 Million March for Children. We brought that fight to his doorstep, and all of a sudden he's turned around saying, I think parental rights are important. He's just a naked opportunist, just like he didn't say a damn thing about the tyranny before the truckers showed up at his doorstep. He needs bandwagons onto which to climb, and it has been Maxime Bernier who has been, a bandwagon builder in a lot of this. He's the only one who's been on the right side of history throughout all of this, and so they're the only one against the gender ideology in schools and the transitions for children. Obviously I'm a foreign policy hawk, so I love everything about the platform in that regard. And I love the party. It's a really supportive party, and they say the important thing is that I just be myself. And so I actually made a tweet. I thought maybe it was a bit spicy. I'm pretty spicy on Twitter, but I'll just say, like, part of it was I had a meme that was like a conservative lawn sign, but it said "cuck off" in the conservative colors, and HQ retweeted it. PPC HQ retweeted it. So it's like, I love my party. I love it. So I'm not really a politician. I'm an ideological warrior. So this is just where the battle space happens to be right now. I went from the cultural battle space and the protest and podcast scene to the legals battle space in the courtroom, and now I'm jumping into the political battle space because, wherever the battle space is, that's where you'll find me. And we got a country to save, right?
All right, Jeff Evely, thank you very much, sir. Stick around for a moment. I want to talk to you for just a moment when we sign off. And folks, thanks for hanging out with us here tonight. I will be back tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern for our regularly scheduled Maverick News program. And I'll be back in 1 hour for this week's edition of Maverick Midnight Matinee. We have a double feature tonight. The movie is not a movie. It's 2 episodes of One Step Beyond. New ones. Well, new to us, old from a long time ago. I'll see you in an hour. Love you guys. Catch you on the flip side.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.